Hello and welcome to this Threat Fabric webinar on the mobile threat landscape in the Gulf region. My name is Moritz Lucas, and in the next 30 minutes or so I'll be giving you an update on the current mobile threats targeting the Gulf region. We'll cover the following topics today. I'll start off by setting the scene. I'll take a minute to introduce who we are at Threat Fabric and what we do and why we're well suited to give insights into the mobile malware threat landscape. Next, I'll briefly cover the three main types of online fraud that we distinguish. Of course, additional fine-grained subclasses exist, but for today's webinar, we'll stick to the main three. Then we'll deal with a question we get asked a lot. How big is the mobile malware problem, and is it something we should be paying attention to? In this section, I intend to show you that the answer to both of these questions is an emphatic yes. Next, we'll look at mobile malware in the Gulf region in particular, looking at which areas are targeted most and which malware families are active in the Gulf region. We'll look at the latest developments around each of these malware families as well. And we'll finish up by looking at what can be done at tackling the growing problem of mobile malware and fraud in mobile channels. At Threat Fabric, we provide visibility into online customer journeys and help protect these journeys from threats such as fraud, identity theft, and other forms of cybercrime. At the core, we help our customers be as attractive online to their customers, while at the same time being as unattractive as possible to fraudsters and cybercriminals. We allow our customers to reduce friction for their legitimate customers, while at the same time detecting and blocking all manner of online threats. We've been doing this since 2015 and are recognized leaders in the industry when it comes to mobile malware and online fraud. We have customers around the globe, including many Tier 1 banks. Our founders came from fraud and cybersecurity in the financial sector. They are convinced that fraud is more than a number. It devastates lives and ruins people. Our mission is to protect real humans from fraudsters and cybercriminals. Let's take a look at the three main types of online fraud: account takeover, device takeover, and authorized push payment fraud. Account takeover, or ATO, is an attack whereby the attacker steals your credentials and then uses those credentials on their own device to commit the fraud. This type of attack usually happens in browser sessions, which are not tied to a specific device, unlike mobile banking apps, which usually are. Technologies such as device fingerprinting are used to detect ATO attacks. In response to these technologies, actors move to device takeover or DTO attacks. In this attack, the fraudsters obtain control of your device, for instance your laptop, tablet or mobile phone. They then use this ability to remotely control your device to submit fraudulent transactions from that same device, using credentials, passwords or security codes they observed you entering earlier. The third type of attack is the authorized push payment or APP fraud. In this attack, it is the actual victim who submits the payment from their own device. They do this because they have been socially engineered by the attacker, and the attacker has convinced them to send money. Initial contact is often made through channels such as voice calls, social media, instant messaging, etc. Romance scams, investment scams, or bank impersonation scams are examples of APP frauds. It almost goes without saying that at Threat Fabric, we help customers detect and block all these types of fraud. In the next slide, let's look at the overall size of the mobile malware threat landscape and the direction it is trending in. The answer to whether the mobile malware problem is a growing one is yes. This becomes apparent when we look at the behavior of actors in the cyber underground. Remember, most of these actors are financially motivated. They want to earn money, and so they will only engage in an activity and continue to do so if it makes them money. And what we see is that over the past 3 years, a thriving underground ecosystem has appeared around mobile malware. And this ecosystem is growing. It doesn't just consist of mobile malware being offered for sale, but also all manner of supporting products and services around that, such as actors offering services to get malware into official app stores, but also hosting services for supporting infrastructure, such as command and control servers, panels, etc. When we look at malware families in more detail, firstly we see that the number of families is growing each year, and that growth is accelerating. This means that writing mobile malware must be profitable, otherwise new actors would not be entering the scene. These malware families are rapidly adding sophisticated new features. Two main ones are remote access capability and attack scripting. Remote access capability is crucial for device takeover attacks, because the remote access functionality is what allows attackers to remotely control the infected device. The second functionality, automated transaction scripts, allows actors to scale device takeover attacks. Without ATS, attackers must be online and waiting for a victim to put down their device so the attacker can remotely control the device without being detected by the victim. ATS automates this process. The attacker does not have to sit around and wait. Instead, the automated script springs into action on any infected device as soon as the circumstances are right. The script completely automatically drives the user interface on the phone, opening the targeted app and entering the transaction details. The attacker does not even have to be online anymore. This obviously makes scaling your attack much, much easier. After this slide, I'll show you a simulated ATS attack in action to give you an idea of how this works. And finally, up to this point, the mobile malware landscape has mostly been a tale of one mobile operating system, Android. Apple's iOS has been a far harder target for criminals. Hard, but not impossible though, with one of the reasons being that the only way to load an app on an iOS device is through Apple's App Store. This is very likely about to change, as new EU regulation will force Apple to allow third-party app stores, at the very least in the EU. The deadline for Apple to comply is March 2024, and it seems that third-party app stores may be coming to iOS in version 17.2 or a version shortly after that. iOS allowing third-party app stores, or maybe even sideloading, will change the mobile threat landscape, and you can be sure that we'll be closely tracking what the cyber underground will make of that development. In this demo video, we'll show you how mobile malware with ATS functionality can manipulate a mobile banking app to carry out fraudulent transactions. For the demo, we'll use a very basic banking app we wrote ourselves for the fictional Threat Fabric Bank. We also wrote the malware ourselves. It too is very basic, and most malware available in the underground will be less obtrusive for the victim, but this is just to demonstrate the ATS attack. After all, we're in the business of fighting malware, not writing it. Also, please note that this attack that you're about to see has been slowed down to make it easy to follow along. Real malware could enter the transaction details many, many times faster, meaning less time for the victim to notice that something is going on. And speaking of noticing anything, in this attack we'll show the screen of the banking app as the malware is entering the details. In most real attacks, the attackers would overlay a black window on top of the app so that the victim would not be able to see anything. They'd just see the backlight of the phone briefly light up, and then the phone would go back to sleep. Again, hardly anyone would think anything of that, would they? And that is all there is to it when your malware has ATS functionality. It can wait for just the right moment, for instance when it detects that the phone is lying down and the screen has been off for a while. Probably in that case, the victim is probably not looking at their phone. Seconds later, the money is gone. To demonstrate the growth of the mobile malware ecosystem, let's now take a look at the number of unique malware families that we are tracking. As you can see from the graph on the right, the number of families remained fairly constant until 2020 and then started growing. It almost makes you wonder if something happened in early 2020 that meant we were all spending more time on a mobile device or behind a keyboard instead of going out and mingling with people. Whatever the reason, 2020 marked a change. Since that time, the number of families has been growing and the rate of growth is increasing. This shows that underground actors see writing mobile malware as a profitable business, and so more actors are joining the fray. Also note that more and more families are adding functionalities to facilitate device takeover or DTO attacks. If we extrapolate this rate of growth, by the end of this year we'll be tracking just under 100 different families from around just 25 a few years ago. Now this slide shows a timeline of when some of the most popular malware strains, the usual suspects, first appeared. Also note that high impact features such as DTO, device takeover, and ATS, automatic transaction scripts, which were rare a few years ago, have rapidly become standard features for newer malware strains, or have been added as new functionality to existing families. With new malware popping up all the time, keeping pace with all of the latest developments is becoming more and more of a challenge for fraud teams. And at the same time, the risks associated with not keeping up to date are increasing, as ATS attacks can lead to large fraud waves appearing instantaneously. With that in mind, let us now turn to an overview of mobile malware activity in the Gulf region. This slide shows the number of times we observed an organization in a country in the Gulf region appearing on a target list from a malware sample over the past 6 months. So the number in this graph is not just based on the number of samples we collected, but also on the number of times a target from each country appeared in a sample. And as you can see, the top 3 is made up of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. But the rest of the countries are actually not that far behind. For Saudi Arabia, we observed an organization appearing on a target list on average 4,400 times each month over the past 6 months. For Bahrain, that number was about 3,200. This makes the Gulf region and organizations in the Gulf regions one of the more actively targeted regions in the world. Europe and North America are other hotspots. The next graph shows which are the most prevalent mobile malware families in the region based on the number of samples seen with targets in the region. As you can see, Exobot or Octo, Hydra, Airmac and Hook are amongst the most popular, but in all there is a fairly diverse set of families present in the region. In the next slides, we'll cover some of the latest developments around each of the most prevalent strains. Exobot Compact, or Octo, is an updated version of the Exobot malware, first seen in 2016. Octo first appeared in early 2022, and the major new feature when compared with the original Exobot is the addition of remote access or RAT functionality. Exobot, or Octo, is a good example of an actor adding new, sophisticated functionality to an existing malware family in response to market demand. The fact that Octo is the most prevalent malware family present in the Gulf region suggests that this new RAT functionality was well received by its customers. The Hydra mobile malware first appeared in early 2022, and our analysis showed that it appeared to be rented by two different groups. One group used it to attack Turkey, and a different group which targeted Europe but also other regions of the world. In early 2023, Turkish law enforcement announced the arrest of the actors behind Hydra, but it seems likely that these actors were connected to the group that used Hydra to attack targets in Turkey. Other actors are still running large campaigns using Hydra, some of which target the Gulf region, as is evidenced from its number 2 spot in the top 10 malware overview. Next, we come to Hook and Ermac. Hook is a successor to the popular Ermac malware. Both were written by the same actor, calling himself Duke Eugene. Like the Exobot Octo combo, the major new feature of Hook when compared to Ermac is the addition of remote access or RAT functionality, as you can see in the screenshot of the control panel, which actually highlights this functionality. In March of 2022, Duke Eugene sold the source code to Ermac in the underground. In January of 2023, he started advertising its successor, Hook. But in April, he suddenly offered the source code for Hook for sale as well. Not just the source code for Ermac, but also Hook. On May 11th, he followed this up with a very terse post, "Bot is sold," which seems to signify a successful sale. The reason for the sale, according to the actor, was that he was joining the Russian military to fight in the war in Ukraine. So it seems very unlikely we'll be seeing any activity around malware development from this actor in the near future. Now it appears that the source code for first Ermac and now Hook were not sold exclusively to one actor by Duke Eugene, but instead he sold the source code to multiple actors. This is evidenced by multiple actors offering the malware for rent, sometimes under new names such as Azazel or Console. We see Ermac being rented out at a price point around the $2,000 mark, with Hook, which is RAT functionality, commanding a price around $3,000 and also being more popular with cybercriminals despite its higher price. Another indicator of how in-demand RAT functionality is, which you'll remember is crucial for device takeover attacks. The actor in the box also announced an Ermac and Hook rental service in September of this year, but besides offering the two families for rent, this actor also offered the source code for sale. Now recently, our analysts have been seeing a resurgence of Ermac, likely as a result of new sellers becoming active on underground forums. As you can see in the top graph, Ermac activity decreased after its successor Hook was announced, but since other actors have started renting and selling Ermac, the number of unique samples seen in the wild has started rising again. Now note that some of the samples we identify as Ermac aren't actually marketed or sold as Ermac. Some of the sellers have renamed their offering, most likely in an attempt to distance themselves from the old Ermac or to appear to distinguish themselves from the original Ermac. The Rusty Droid panel on the right is a very fresh and new one, but actually Rusty Droid is nothing but a renamed Ermac. So in the final part of this webinar, we wanted to discuss what organizations can do to fight the threat of mobile malware, as well as other types of fraud in online channels, i.e., what can be done about it. Well, it starts with an important question. Does your organization have visibility into mobile threats targeting you and your customers? If the answer to that question is no or not enough, we think the first step is to gain visibility into the threat landscape. This webinar is a good starting point, but of course, it's a snapshot in time, and you'd want this to be an in-depth and ongoing process. The second step is to ensure you have detection capability in your online channels and on your employee devices. And we know just the people to talk about both of these topics. Us. Our offering consists of two parts, which can be used separately or together, with the latter obviously having the biggest impact. Our mobile threat intelligence offering gives you in-depth insights into the mobile and online threat landscape from the industry-leading experts. Our fraud risk suite, or FRS offering, allows you to detect all kinds of fraud, be it account takeover, device takeover, or authorized push payment fraud in your online channels, either browser-based or app-based on mobile devices such as phones, tablets, etc., whether Android or iOS. FRS looks at the device, the user behavior, the device characteristics, and the transaction, and continuously analyzes tens of thousands of data points in real time to determine the likelihood that certain activity is either genuine and benign or is a threat and should be blocked. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. I hope you found it useful, and I want to thank you for allowing me to bend your ear. Should you want to know more, a great place to start is with our in-depth report on the state of Android banking malware, which you can find on the resources part of our website. The link is on screen below. And now we have some time to answer some of the questions that came in during the webinar in the questions box. If you have any questions, you can still enter them. There's a question and a Q&A box on the right side of the screen. We got some good questions coming in. I'll try and answer as many of them as I can in the time remaining. If we don't get round to your question, don't worry, we'll follow up offline. So the first question is, how does mobile malware typically get onto devices? Generally we see one of two ways. The first one is sideloading. So sideloading means convincing or social engineering a victim into installing an app, not from an app store, but by downloading it and installing it on your phone directly. This obviously is a feature that Android offers. iOS doesn't yet offer anything like that, and may not in the future. But the idea with sideloading is to basically social engineer the user into installing the app directly. Some of the more common tactics we see is luring the user to a website which will then pretend that the Chrome browser needs an update and kind of coach the user into downloading and installing that update, even enabling the sideloading of apps, which is by default disabled on Android. But there's all kinds of other ways. You see instant messages about packages gone missing, etc. Documents you need to read, but you need to download an extension. The other main way is actually to get your malware into app stores. Now, this is usually done in a kind of two-stage approach. What is actually published in the App Store is not the malware itself, but so-called loader app, an app whose task it is to load and install the actual payload later on. When you install a loader malware, it will typically ask for permissions, and one of the critical permissions and key ones is to install additional apps. Once it obtains that permission, it will use it to install the real malware. Now, these loader apps are often kind of a whole underground service by themselves, and they're often disguised as utilities that users may search for on the App Store, such as PDF viewers or file managers, etc. We've actually published recently, last week, published a very interesting report on how the most recent version of loaders are bypassing the latest measures implemented by Google, intended to make it hard to sideload malware. All the details are in our report on SecurityDropper that you can find on our website. So the next question is, what organizations are typically targeted? Well, mostly we see banks being targeted, but also other fintech companies such as crypto apps. We saw one piece of malware recently that was interested in stealing or aimed at stealing crypto wallet seeds. And it did that by opening your crypto wallet app, navigating to the settings, and then copying the seed stored there. You could see the little field with your wallet seed, and it would simply copy it out. And that's how it stole your crypto currency. Now, we also sometimes see apps being used to kind of steal PII. So those will target typical apps that contain interesting personal information. The next question coming in is, we also mentioned protecting employee devices. Why? Well, that is a very good question. And although I've only been talking, or primarily been talking, about financial fraud against customers, mobile malware can be used for other purposes as well. And it can also end up on employee devices. And employee devices often access or contain a lot of sensitive company data. And so having malware on there that allows external actors to remotely operate that phone and access that data could lead to very, very serious incidents. So monitoring those devices, but also the activities on them for any malicious activity, is a very good idea. And it's especially a good idea because quite recently, we've also started to see mobile malware being used for APT-like attacks. We just recently published a report on LightSpy, which is a mobile malware campaign used to monitor victims in Asia by APT41, a Chinese nation-state linked group. For instance, it was definitely very interested in monitoring location data, trying to determine kind of the victim's location right down to the floor of the building they were on. You can find that report on our Threat Fabric website as well. And I think for this region, with some of the countries in the region being very active in cyberspace, that is a kind of an attack vector that would be very good to kind of take into account in your overall security plans. The final question is that we've got time for, just one more, is this purely an Android problem, or is there also things that you can affect iOS? And the answer to that is, at present, most of the malware, the vast majority of it, is focusing on Android only. The LightSpy campaign I just mentioned did also actually target iOS. In that case, it used an old or an unpatched version, rather an unpatched vulnerability. So if phones were running a very old version of iOS, there was a vulnerability that the malware would have used to basically install itself on the phone. But one of the other issues we see with iOS is recently Apple introduced web clips, which is basically the ability to take a bookmark for a site and make it appear in your app drawer like an app, because when the website opens, it opens full screen, which almost makes it look like an app. And we do see actors trying to get links to malicious websites onto iOS phones as web clips. And of course, we all expect that Apple, before end of March next year, will in some way open up the iOS ecosystem to third-party app stores. So that will be a significant change, and we'll all be keeping a very close eye on the developments around that very fundamental change to the iOS ecosystem. And that brings us up to the half hour. So I want to again thank you for taking the time to listen to this webinar, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.